Okay, well, welcome back. A small group as we are. Thanks a lot, Craig and Deborah, for being here with us. I hope everybody had a great break. I know for some of you, this is your first week back, and for others, this is your second week back. So depends on what your schedule was for Christmas. But nonetheless, we are back and doing Earth systems, and we will again be recording this and then posting it to the website so that you have access to that and to the other ones that were done as well. So without any further ado, I am going to get us started here. Just now, you're gonna have to bear with me, you guys, because everything's new. I'm in a different office and I'm not on two screens. And you know, isn't it funny how quickly you get used to having technology at your fingertips? So I'm going to try and get that going as well. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history may have forgotten. So when we have always done the acknowledgements in the past, we have always made a bit of a stop here at the acknowledgement to maybe tie in some of the conversations and pieces that we might have that are related to this and our Indigenous cultures. And when we talk about land, and this was mentioned in the last session as well, land is part of the life of our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. It isn't just what they live off of, it is part of their life. It is part of their spirituality. And so to that end, I would like to just start with a little bit of a short video, very short, but I wanted you to have just again another perspective of the meaning of land and the meaning of certain places. In particular, all these elders are from Alberta, of what is happening in their world as far as or what they're seeing as very important pieces and the reasons, the foundational knowledge behind that.
I believe we have to respect our medicinal plants. We have to respect this earth for what it produces for us.
We've been on the landscape. As far as the archaeological record goes, based on radiocarbon dating and the tools and weapons and things, is 12,000 years.
We got our food from the animals and the plants and the berries, and we respected that land as a matter of survival.
Land-based teachings is all about the land itself. And when I invite children, students, teachers, parents to come and understand that, it's not me just telling them, it's the nature. And land-based teachings is more of a hands-on rather than just sitting there listening to you, someone, or looking at, the screen to observe.
Survey your land and see what's there, the richness and the wealth of especially medicines, and save those plants because you can't transplant them for future use. And if you just remove them, then what have you got? There's nothing left.
The whole landscape is imbued with knowledge and history and the story of the Blackfoot people. I bring a lot of students and children and teachers out to these sites and share the origin, the creation stories, and the actual location of these places.
For the Métis, Lake St. Anne is so dear to all of us because that's where our spirit is and our ancestors.
You have to be there at the site of the story to get a better grasp and feel of it. And the kids are just spiritually moved, and it's a real good life learning lesson.
So it's just been so rewarding for the children and for my heart.
So 2 of our First Nations and 1 of our Métis settlements actually provide land-based learning for our students, and this is completely done by the elders and knowledge keepers. And all the time our elders are talking to us about all the different teachings that the children will go through in that program so that our teachers can embed that into their other curriculum pieces.
Every time we have an elder in to come and do professional development for us, it's always about or comes down to the land. And that's what I say to principals. It comes down to the land. If you'd like to have really effective learning, try and do it in the environment.
Being able to go outside and learn our practices, like how to make bannock, how to hunt, how to bead, how to make our regalia for our dances. I believe strongly we should be learning this already.
And when you go out in a land base, you connect to nature. You create that balance where you could feel, touch, and see. And that's the uniqueness about land-based teaching, is that you want to make that connection. Because ideally, nature will put you in your place and make you realize who you are as a human being, and that we can walk in this world in harmony, not only with each other, but with nature.
All right, so switch this around here. Sorry, guys, this is not being my day for sure. All right, so here we go. I think we're good to go finally. And I might just disappear here for a minute and get Ted to take over because I'm getting some emails from people that need to get in. So when our series started, I know that you've been with us, but especially for those who are new, just wanting to just touch base again that these sessions, being the short time that they are, there's no way that we can unpack an entire complete unit, lesson plans and all. But what we do want to do is give you enough foundational background in the concepts and how you're going to assess them and what am I supposed to be assessing, because not everything is the big rock here. And then what are some tools that I might use to set up my own units as I'm planning, because in the absence of having any resources maybe that you're looking for, then I don't have all the things that I need to pull from. So that's where we're hoping that when you finish this session with us for today, you at least walk away with snippets that you can take as far as assessment, as far as embedding some resources into your lessons and your units, however that design is going to look. So giving it a little bit of a sense of direction and perhaps some efficacy that you don't feel like you're kind of on your own here and doing everything by yourself. Okay, so let's move on. We do have a bit of an agenda. So as we have in the past, we are going to look at those cusps again and the concepts that live inside of those 4 Earth systems. And what are the ones that kind of stand out? There are tons of concepts in this particular organizing idea, and it's a little bit disjointed, I guess. And I don't want to mean that in a negative way, but it is, we kind of are grasping at one thing and then we go to another thing, go to another thing. They are connected, but not maybe in a smoother way as they could be. And given what the grade 2s have already done and maybe where they're heading in grade 4, you know, it seems like we've got a few sort of odd things just sort of thrown in. But nonetheless, we want to unpack those concepts, how they connect together, and what are those understandings that we're going to be making sure that the knowledge, skills, and procedures have built together, that we're meeting those understandings. Ted always does such a fantastic job of providing you also with instructional strategies and considerations. So we want to make sure that we have those opportunities for you as well. And then I'll go through and give you some examples of resources that you're able to use. So I'm going to turn it over to Ted here and let him take off from here.
Thanks, Chris. Really briefly, you're all familiar with this if you're doing the language arts and math in elementary. It's the same structure with all the curricular where we have an organizing idea. And Chris, I'm just going to say, because you're sharing your screen, I don't know if the other participants can see it. There's a black
Oh,
box.
I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah,
that's
you
all
probably
right.
are seeing that.
Yeah, we don't see what it is. It's just a black box.
Sorry. No, we'll make sure those stay down.
No problem. Instead of units, we have organizing ideas now. Of course, this is Earth System. It's got the umbrella things, and they span across different grades. And then the organizing idea is narrowed down using a guiding question and a related learning outcome. It's that learning outcome that we report on, as you know, understandings and skills and procedures, or those cusps. But we do need to work with them and assess them in some way in order to decide when it's time to move on. And we'll explain that a little bit later. The next slide shows the span of the organizing ideas across the grades. You see in grade 3 is the last year that space is not taught. So K to 3 in the organizing ideas, but starting grade 4 up, they have them all. And those organizing ideas are worded very similar or the same throughout the grades, so that there's some continuity. And as you, Chris, alluded to, a lot of the concepts and understandings kind of spiral in and out of the grades. So some of the concepts in kindergarten and grade 1 and grade 2 even pop up in grade 3. So it's not what Chris would call you have a good name for it. I forget what it is, but we don't just do it in our little box and teach it for 1 year and the next year teacher teaches something different. These are quite connected as we move along. So we'll go to the next slide. Again, just wanted to keep in mind the whole idea that when you go to New Alberta new curriculum, you will find these progressions for the competencies, the literacies, and the numeracy. And they're vital as well, because when you do look at them closely, those are things that we hope that when our kids leave our classrooms and when they leave our schools and when they're out in our communities and become contributing members to our community, that they have these things. Our societies, our communities are dependent on our young kids leaving our schools with these things. And so they won't get them, though, if we just treat the curriculum guide as a checkbox and go through one thing to another. We need to be intentional and try to include these things. And while it may be hard to try to do that, it's really not when you try to think about what it means to actually get kids to take what they learn in school and apply it to their world. And you're familiar with the term transfer. Next slide, please, Chris. So if we can think that transfer is really what we're all about, that we're in a classroom where we want kids to take with them what they learn from us to their next grade and outside in their world and to the next grade and so on, we need to have transfer as our goal. That what they do in our classrooms has merit and utility when they leave our classrooms. So what I'm going to do today is go 100 miles an hour to give you a brief overview of how we can move towards that. It may be daunting as we move forward, but don't let it be, because it's just little baby steps. It might be a matter of looking back and taking small steps and making small changes as we go along. But I think in order for us to really move forward to transfer, we need to start taking a look at how we can do that and put our best foot forward. So let's begin. When I'm talking about transfer, I do mean that taking something and applying it to someone from their context. So in this particular case, if a friend asked you whether this novel was a good one to read, you have a choice to make. You're going to decide how you're going to let that person know what the book is about. And we can do that in a variety of ways, from comparing and contrasting to a novel we know. We can give it an analysis. Well, maybe I don't think we can synthesize it, but what we'll probably do is choose something to summarize. So we're transferring what we know about summarizing into this context of telling our friend what a novel is about that we just read. Similarly, in the next slide, we could take ideas or concepts like, I can't see the words there, a little bit of your screen is. See the words
Unfortunately,
that, that's totally fine. The perspective is a word there. We can see creativity there. We can see wealth there, perhaps. We can see symmetry, perhaps. So we can see ecosystems. So we can see lots of those things in there. We can transfer what we know to different situations and different contexts. And that's what transfer is all about. So in order to make that happen, we got to go to the root things with that transfer the most, and that's the idea of concepts. We've covered this in the last slide, so if you're familiar with this, just bear with me because some people who are viewing this may be new. We know that a concept is just an organizing idea, just as a file folder is. When you take a file folder and you give it a label, you give it 1 or 2 words, and you put things into it that have the attributes for that folder. So a concept of car, for example, is something with 4 wheels and has an engine in it and drives people around. Perhaps that might be the distinctive attributes of a car. A truck has other attributes which make it distinguishable from a car, though. We would call the bottom right-hand thing a truck and not a car. And then when we have something that have attributes of both, then we're stuck with thinking, okay, well, this is not a car or a truck, it's something else. And we may have to make a new concept for that. So next slide, Chris. I'm just going to go through a few more things about concepts. We know that they are broad concepts such as system. Then those span across all the subjects and a lot of disciplines, but we can get narrower down as we dive deep into the disciplines. We know, for example, there's writing systems and reading systems and earth systems and different subjects. And as we go down, we're talking about earth systems. We could talk about the components in earth systems, such as plants and animals and humans and landforms. And so the more specific you get, the more deeper you get into the subject area. Another thing about concepts is, next slide, please, is that they all have definitions. Now, this is the definition is usually found in the knowledge part. In this organizing idea, there are really not necessarily a lot of definitions. You give lots of examples, but there's not much for definitions. And you can see the concept change, for example. It's in the guiding question, it's in the learning outcome, but they don't define it. They give lots of examples. So you'll have to use your other resources to get some help. Sometimes the other organizing ideas in the particular grade you're in and subject help, and sometimes you have to go to other curricula. If we're looking at time, there is a definition for time actually that works well for grade 3 in the grade 1 math curriculum. So you may want to go back to something like that to look for time. So concepts do have definitions. They could be in the guide. They may be somewhere that you have to search for. Concepts also have examples. We know that the way that humans can shape landforms have examples, and those are all the examples listed there. I kind of somehow didn't do the other box correctly, right? So usually the examples will be in that knowledge piece. Other times we need to search for our own examples through texts and images and so on. Another thing about concepts is, I'm going to the next slide. Again, that's a broadest here. They are transferable. In this particular case, you could see probably change in the image on the left, and you could probably see change in the image on the right. And so that is the neat thing about concepts, is that time, place, context doesn't matter. We can apply those and view the world through those ideas. And since concepts are transferable, Chris, we're going to go to the next slide. The world through different things. We could use concepts as lenses because they provide focus. If you looked at this picture here, I'm not too sure what you first noticed when you looked at this image, but if I was to ask you to look at through the image of lifestyle, which maybe you not have done, you might not have noticed the lifestyle of agrarian, like a farmer or a pastoral lifestyle. If I asked you to look through the lens of resources, you may not have noticed picked up the grass as a resource, or the trees as a resource, or the livestock as a resource. So they do provide focus for us. And with that, then we're going to use a conceptual lens to take a closer look at the cusps. And the first lens that we're going to use is the lens of concepts. Once again, they're all over the place in our learning or in our cusps and the outcomes and the guiding questions. I've highlighted all those that are concepts. Some of them are bigger ones and more important than others. And if you use a conceptual lens and look at them, you'll find which ones are those big ones that we really got to work with. The red ones I've highlighted because they're associated with a skill or a procedure. For example, if someone is investigating, they're doing an investigation. So what are the qualities of an investigation? What makes an investigation an investigation? And so there are related concepts with each of those skills when we take a look at them. Let's move on to understandings. Oh, no, anchoring concepts, I guess, right? No, there were a lot of those concepts highlighted in that little section that I pulled out. When you take a look at the guiding questions and the learning outcomes and the cusps, you'll find that these are sort of some of the common ones. Now, I'll talk about landscape later. It's a troublesome one. It shows up here and there, but it's a biggie, and I'll show you why in a second. Interaction is one that does show up quite a bit because if we're talking about change and the environment, there's some interaction happening with plants, animals, humans, interaction with the different components of the environment. It's not used very often, but it really is a foundational thing. Same with change. As I mentioned before, they don't give a definition of change, but my, oh my, it's everything in this curriculum, this organizing idea really revolves around change, and change happens over time. And so while you can see change and time show up here and there, some of these concepts I think are kind of hidden, and I think they do become anchoring concepts. So we may have to pay closer attention to them as we go along. There's lots of minor concepts, glacier, volcano, and all those things related to things that cause the change. But I think we're going to keep those at a fairly surface level. I think these are the anchoring ones for this organizing idea. Next slide, please, Chris. Concepts, the other thing about concepts is they can relate to each other. So what I did, and Chris mentioned to the difficulty of putting trying to make sense out of this organizing idea because there's so many concepts. And I did kind of get a connection done here. And you could, hopefully this helps when you're planning. The way I look at it is that Earth's surface experiences change. Some of that surface is in water, and there are different causes to that change, such as water, wind, or both, and plants and humans. And animals is not in there, but animals should be in there. I'll have to fix that up. And so as you follow the arrows along, you can find the way this organizing idea is kind of organized. It is a little bit this and that, but that gives you a picture of it if you want to use it as a map as you go along through the course. Please.
I'm going to jump in really quickly, Ted, just for a second here, because
Sure.
the concept map that Ted's created really kind of nails the complexity of this organizing idea. And when he says, there are lots of things in here, so many of them will be surface leveled that we're going to touch on, because if you really dig down into any one of these colors, you'll quickly realize you could spend a month just on that. So it really is sort of teasing out at a grade 3 level, we're looking for earth change, and they are going to get deeper into that. They're going to get into all the different levels and those pieces coming grade 4 or 5. So it was really looking down the road to see how deep they're going to go at a different time to unpack how deep we would go in grade 3. Sorry, Ted, I just wanted to jump in because this grade's so unique. Yeah,
no problem. So let's take a look then at understandings. You can go to the next slide, Chris. Mentioned before when I talked about the concept map, I mentioned that concepts are related to each other, and that creates an important. That's really where we get our understandings from. 3 concepts I have listed there: human activity, change, and land. And probably landscape, maybe the better one to choose there, and I'll explain why in a second. But we have three concepts there And individually, they have a certain meaning. Human activity, we could give examples of that. We could think of examples of change, and we could think of examples of the land, whether it be, you know, mountains or a street or something, right? But when you ask you to put them all together in a statement of a relationship that explains how they're connected, something different happens. They're more than just their individual definitions. So if you were to think about what is the connection between those three, you might come up with something like these statements. You can go to the next slide, Chris. Oh, I guess I'm just using landforms and characteristics. I don't know what happened there. I changed these slides around so much. Anyway, the point is that we've got, again, two concepts. And if we state them in relationship to each other, we can have a totally different understanding. So we have landforms on Earth can be distinguished by their characteristics. And landforms on Earth have varying characteristics. Now, this is from the grade 3 curriculum. That's why, or grade 2 curriculum, that's why it's here. But you can see just by stating them differently, there's a different understanding. And so putting those concepts together, create that middle piece, that understanding, something different than just those individual things. Next slide. Hopefully we're back into grade 3, Chris.
Yep.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So yeah, that first slide I gave you was that human activities and changes in land. So those are 3 concepts. They have individual meanings, but when we put them together in the understanding, it has a totally different meaning. If you go to the next slide, Chris, I'm pretty sure it should be there in grade 3 still. You can see all those, a lot of the understandings from this organizing idea. Look at the next one underneath there, Earth's surface. Once again, changes over time. And there's that concept, time. Okay, changes to the Earth's landscape. And I can't read that bottom part in that third understanding.
I can't get that
Okay,
far to
that's
go
right.
away, sorry.
Well, at the end of the day, when you look at the understandings, you'll see that those are they take the individual concepts from the knowledge thing and they put them together and it creates an understanding, something a little bit more than just separate pieces of knowledge. Next slide, please. Oh, just want to put a note on landscape. And this is, and I don't know, I'm going to be using the word, I maybe would use the word landscape more than anything. This comes from the same cusp, the same line. And if you read the understanding, we see the concept land on Earth. Humans, plants, and activities cause changes to land on Earth. The related scale says human activities change the Earth's surface. And in the knowledge, human activities shape landscapes. And they don't even use the word change there, they have shape there. And so we have to be, I think, really careful and just choose one. I would just choose one and go with it, I think is all that I say. You could see in the outcome, they use Earth's surface. So maybe that's what it might mean. But to me, I don't know. When we start talking about lakes freezing water, to me, it's more the landscape, I think, that can change. And that'd be my go, I think. But that choice is yours, I guess. So just, you'll probably see that troublesome thing. I don't think they mean different things. I think all those things mean the same thing. Next slide. I could be wrong. I'm going to go with it. So again, those understandings themselves are transferable now because concepts are transferable. So when we put them together, that understanding is also transferable. So we can see examples of how human activities can cause changes to land on Earth through any of these contexts. We could probably say that there's a change there and it's human caused, and we can see that, and therefore it's transferable. Next slide. So here's the things we just talked about over the last several slides. A lot of thoughts that concepts have definitions, they have examples, and they're transferable. They can help us provide a focus by creating a conceptual lens, and we can put concepts in relationship with each other. And when we do that, we create a broader understanding, and that understanding itself is transferable as well. So one more conceptual lens. We've looked at understandings. We've looked at the knowledge. Now let's take a quick look at the doing words, or the skills and procedures. When you use your lens to look for those skill and procedure words, please keep these 3 tips in mind. You'll notice that when you do try to isolate, you'll see there's a skill part, the verb part, and then a content part. So try to separate out and take a look at what that key, just the verb is. What's the skill it's looking at? It becomes important for you, which I'm able to do now, because if we just teach that whole or teach to that whole skills and procedure statement, we know if they don't quite do that properly, or let's say it's compare and contrast something, if they don't know how to compare and contrast and we're attaching it to the content of the course, not too sure if it's because they don't know how to compare and contrast or because they're having trouble with the content. So it would make sense to separate the skill, work with you can, teach it as a skill by itself without the content, and then apply the content to it later. And then another thing to keep in mind is to clarify it in your mind what it's asking you. Sometimes the statement is not really clear on what the skill is. So in the link that I have, it shows a little bit more of what I have down below. In the link, Chris, if you can go there, I've got all those skills and procedures listed. I meant that, yeah, there's a link on top there. I'm not too sure if
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there
that's
we
right.
go. Bring that up a bit for you.
All right, so this is organized in the same way of that slide, that the image where it's got the number and then the key word. So I pulled that out, and then the content part. So at the end of the day, you could see investigate shows up a lot, discuss shows up, represent. And so to be able to spend time working ahead of time before you get kids to discuss some of the content of the course, can they discuss? What's a good discussion? How do they discuss? And how can you give them feedback on that? The highlighted cells are those question mark ones. I'm not too sure what they mean. So identify can mean a couple things. In some cases, identify can mean classify. For example, identify the mountains in this picture. Well, they're now classifying, right? Whereas identify glacial fed rivers that are local within Alberta, to me, that would be something for kids to categorize without really doing some in-depth work. It may be just a knowledge thing. But if they've done the research and followed where the rivers originate, perhaps then that could be a categorization example. Relate is a tough one. Does it mean to know, to explain, or just to match? I'm not too sure. So we'll see there. And consider is I'm not too sure how you'd even assess consider. Consider how animals that live underground change the soil, but maybe it means discuss, could mean reflect. I'm not too sure. So those, when you see those, like, what is it really getting at? And then put your best foot forward and take it that direction. To me, I think these are some of the key ones: investigate or examine, discuss, and research. Just a note on the research piece, because there's some things in there that are referred to research, and there's some pretty big things when they use them in the. It seems to be a fairly big activity when they include it in the skills and procedures. Just keep in mind that in the competency progressions for grades 1 to 3, they do identify what grades 1 to 3 students ought to be knowing and be able to do for researching. Certainly there's more, but those are things that they would be a competency at grades 1 to 3 for research. And you'll see later on, I'll have a link to investigating for grade 3. And you'll see the link later, and that'll help you with anything that has investigate on it. All right, so we've gone through those 3 components, those cusps, a little bit more depth perhaps than we have in the past. And I began my discussion with how we should probably be to transfer all these things that are in the curriculum, how we move from the curriculum document from a surface level, which is just a basic level, but at a very important level, a solid understanding of individual concepts and a solid grasp of those individual skills. Can students compare and contrast? Can they discuss? Do they know how to share properly? Do they know how to do those things? So we try to unpack and practice those things necessarily you could, But if you really want to get them to practice, use some familiar content to do that with. In the deep end, that's where we start taking those individual concepts in the understanding and that middle part and connecting them, and have kids practice seeing that understanding in different contexts. So it's kind of two-part. It's helping kids make those connections between and helping them apply that understanding to different contexts. So by the time you get to transfer mode, they're doing that more independently. Same with the skills, they're learning how to do it. At deep, they're applying it, they're still getting feedback, but then there comes a point where you say, okay, you know what, you can go do this activity independently because you know how to do this skill. I have a little graphic that goes along with that, and I just wanted to highlight it again to help maybe understand the difference between surface and deep and transfer. You'll notice that when you'll see the word concept under surface, there's a flat one, and there move it to a bigger box. The flat surface one refers to just the definition. We just have a definition of a concept and have kids memorize that. That's a pretty flat understanding. If we want a more broad understanding of individual concepts, they should be able to provide examples, create examples, and so on. So that deep, once again, is that's where they start making those connections between the concepts, and the different colors are the contexts in which those things are investigated. So at first you'll want to do that at a familiar level context. Later on, we could start putting in course material when they start becoming better at it, because now they're going to be starting to be more dependent. And then we can really try to get some really unfamiliar context later on. You'll see I kind of have a connection between deep and transfer. Again, transfer means you're applying something to a different context. And then so when you're in deep, you're still doing that. You're applying understandings to different contexts, whether it's a picture or a book or a novel, but it's more hand-holding until you feel you can let them go into the transfer mode. Next slide, please, Chris. There's all kinds of instructional approaches to help it build those individual concepts or individual skills. There are some links there that may help you out. You'll see if you want to do an investigation, there's a process of investigation, and you might want to know, well, what is an investigation? And that's a grade 1 one, but it might be helpful for investigation. The words prediction and conclusion are used. So those are some concept attainment examples you may want to use. There's something called the spectrum sort. Maybe just quick click on that, Chris. It's an easy one to look at. So when you go to spectrum sort, what it is just you've got your spectrum of more or less. And I'm using this because there's not much for change in the curriculum. So I think we need to spend a little bit of time to do this. And so if we were to take a look at a student and say, well, you know, we already know what change is, but what's a significant change? Change is not equal. And so then we go on to the next slide and we can say, okay, here's some pictures here. Organize these changes to an individual as most significant to least significant, most important to least important. Where would they fall on that spectrum? And then they could do a similar thing, but not this time instead of changes to humans, changes to the environment. And that'd be the next slide, Chris. And so again, kids will put them on there. This could be a good group thing, but the important part is the discussion afterwards, like why did you put them here, to justify it? And then that helps them to really, when they can start justifying things, you build as a class a consensus for what is it, that little bit of a pebbles, built up by a human being, or is it that cityscape? What is the most significant thing? And it helps kids to develop that concept of significant change. We can go out of there then, Chris. So there's lots of activities and instructional approaches. Some of them I don't have examples of all of them, but many of them you may be familiar with, and they could be Googleable to get a good example of them as well. An important one as well, the direct teaching skills. That's the where you basically directly say, here's the steps, here's what we do, and let's practice the steps like you would anything else, whether it's a thinking skill or procedure such as scientific investigations. And there's an example there for you. When it comes to deep, Oh, I have some other things in here as well. So keep going. Just another surface level example of change. This is to develop the concept change. Like, what is change? And I'm giving examples of things that have changed. And you could just go through that series of slides, Chris. That's change. That's change. Next slide is change. Is there another one? Yeah, I think so. Yep, there's a change there. Next slide. Well, is this change? Why? What is it? What is it an example of change? What is it? What's happening there? Well, someone's hanging up their clean laundry. And there's different ways we can look at change. And again, this is one that's not really addressed, but the whole organizing idea is about change, really, when you think about it. Some of it's fast or slow. I think significant, non-significant change is that one to put in there. Natural man-made change is in there. Positive, negative change, you don't really allude to it, but I think we have to include that in there when we're talking about change. And so you can use at the surface level, you can help develop these things so they understand what they are when you start looking at more in-depth case studies and so on. At the deep level, what we're really trying to do is help kids create those connections in those understandings. So we know what the understanding is. How kind of activities can we set up so they can sort of come to that conclusion? And I'll show you what I mean in a second here. So typically, what we have to do is take those concepts and give them something to do with it. Think about it and give them a skill or procedure, something to do with it. And some can evaluate, they can analyze things, but you have them do something with it. And we often do that, but we stop there. They've compared the two things, or they've researched this stuff and they shared it with the class. And we stop there. That's still surface level. They can do those things, they're practicing the skill and they're using it. But we want to get them to get an understanding about that. So what we have to do is add just a little thing on to the end of it. And I'll show you what I mean, I think, with the next slide, Chris. But maybe it could be, just go to the next slide, I think. Oh, no, that's just, yeah, that slide's not showing up too well. But really what the understanding does is pull keyword like research, and then the key concepts from the knowledge part, human activities and shape, or which are change and landscapes. You'll see those now in the middle there. So we're going to use research, those things to help us create an understanding. And here's how we might do it. I think that slide is next, I hope. It's not, but I think it shows up afterwards. So these are all things you can do at the deep level. When you do concept mapping, tell kids to explain what you got there. That'll show up. Okay, that understanding will show up. Asking conceptual questions and so on. Hexagonal thinking, if you're not familiar with that, it's really kind of neat too. I think grade 3s may be able to start doing that kind of things. So I think the next slide, Chris, will show you an example what I mean by just don't stop at the activity. It's always good to ask these conceptual questions after activity. What did you learn? How are these two things connected? How does this and this interact? At the younger grades, you may want to give more of a prompt to those questions, which is the next slide. So now this is a little bit more manageable for younger kids. How does A cause blank? How does human activity change landscape? All right, so you're giving them the connection, or does human activity change landscape? You're kind of helping them out a little bit more. So if we go to the next slide, do you have a quick example I'll share with you? Which is research how human activities have changed the Earth's surface. So we can do that, and we may think there I've hit the understanding, but not really. You'll get the kids researching human activities, and they'll come across with all those things there. Here's how humans have changed the Earth's surface by living on the land, by building towns, by farming, and so on. And then typically then they will maybe report to the class, and they record their findings. But that's still, all that's still at the surface level. We just got to stop and ask that question at the end of it all. And I think, Chris, if you go to the next slide, we'll see that. So there's a chart you might use for something like this, but by asking that question at the end, now we're suddenly moved the entire activity from surface to deep. Ask them, what is based on the information you have here, what is the connection between human activity, change, and landscape? and be able to tell me why based on the information you got. Now working at a totally different level. Next slide, please, Chris. Chris has a video later on. I don't know if you have time to show it, but it's really cool. It's called 37 seconds. And just clipped up there. There's different changes happening over 37 years in different environments. Some of them are human activity, human-made change, and some of our natural change, and the different settings. So it's asking you to, if you do that, if you show that, Chris, maybe keep this in mind, everybody, just sort of think of those segments and what did change, is it human or not? But again, after that activity, after that question, how does video show the connection between time, human activity, and there's a whole bunch of concepts, I can't read them there, human activity, natural activity, time, change, and landscape. How are those ideas connected based on what you just saw? And the video goes by pretty fast. You might have to play it over a few times, but it's a really powerful little video. Next slide, please. Again, that's getting to the deep level. And finally, like I said, what you do at the deep level is very similar to transfer level, except maybe on a broader, more independent scale. And the context is different and there's more independence. Quite often now we kids have all the understanding, at least competent with, and the concepts and understandings, they feel solid with it. Now you can give them a project-based learning. They could do something in their environment or something in the community to transfer those skills in a totally varied and new context. Maybe it's going and investigating human and natural changes in a park or something that's nearby their school, and they can take all those concepts and skills and apply it to that learning activity. And finally, told you I was going to go 100 miles an hour. We have to just talk about assessment. We know we don't report on the cusps, but we do have to assess along the way to know when our kids are ready to move from surface to deep, and when they're ready for transfer, and maybe when they're ready for that summative assessment. A lot of the familiar formative assessments that we already do are there, but on the next slide, there are some things that I can show you that are good questions that as you're assessing along the way. You know, if you're asking students to state a definition, you're at the surface level. If you ask them to distinguish between examples and if you ask them to just use a skill to do something at the surface level. So if you read really those skills and procedures things, they're really at the surface level. Some of them are more at the transfer level, because sometimes those skills and procedure statements will say, apply this to this. Okay, that's different than researching something, right? We have to add that question on to put it to deep. And that's where those deep questions are. When you're doing an activity, can students create those relationships with the activities? Can they provide or justify why they made certain connections? Can they look at something and say, oh, I understand that through this understanding? Can they explain why they think, you know, this matches with their understanding? And of course, the transfer part is taking it into wholly more distant and more independent contexts. And I am one final note before I hand you over to Chris, who's got really good resources. You know, it's that whole thing of intentionality. And I just want to go through this to make sure we understand that learning resources, and we'll see videos and we'll come across images, or we'll read poems and say, be intentional, say, hey, I can use this in my class at this stage in the progress of where I am with the kids learning, or I can use this assessment at this stage in the learning, or I found a neat really learning activity that I downloaded from the web, and because I know it's going to fit here, because it's going to help me to help draw the understanding. So we just ask that to help move that transfer process along, that you become really intentional with what we do and how we do things. And now, Chris.
Okay. All right, so let me just see if we can get that link to come up. And Ted, I'll have to ask you to keep an eye on the chat box because I can't see you guys.
Right.
Okay. All right. And that's probably what was blocking our screen there, was the chat box. There we go. All right, so as Ted gave you some really good ideas about a pretty big, broad, as I started off saying, a pretty broad subject here, in the sense that any one of those pieces we could absolutely spend a lot of time on. And I don't know about you, but when you bring dinosaurs into a picture with kids, like they're all over that, and you could spend the whole world on that with them. They just seem to, there's no end to how much they can dive into the world of dinosaurs. And that's part of this, but it's not the only thing. And so when I was unpacking and looking at some of these pieces, again, when I went through to find resources, I was looking for things that did not just hit one of the cusps. I was looking for things that identified the big rocks of a cusp, but ventured into and supported the other areas of those learning understandings that we have in there as well. So that if I was talking about force of nature, and I wanted to talk about the elements of water and what it can do, that those could be connected. So yes, we've had some natural catastrophes in Alberta, and yes, water was involved in it. So how can I meld those two together, right? Having those conversations. Volcanoes, learning about a volcano versus do we even have volcanoes in our end of the world in Western Canada? Yes, we do. And so taking them through the whole venture of seeing what a volcano looks like right now in BC, and could it potentially erupt? Yes. Where do they even exist, right? Just some of those pieces to tie them together so that students are also recognizing the pieces that they would have landed at your doorstep with had it been a perfect world where they'd already done kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, new curriculum science. They would have landed at your doorstep with full knowledge of different landforms. They would have understood weather already. So if that's true, you're going to have to be cognizant that because of that, and because you're starting just sort of dropped right into grade 3, that I might not as your student know about different landforms. So again, I picked videos that would show different landforms so that you could even have that just quick conversation about, oh, do you notice that that's a mountain versus this is a hill versus this is a valley? Those different components they should have already known. So Earth continues to change. Change was one of the biggest concepts that Ted has referenced in here. And I agree totally that this is what it was all about. It was just how much depth do we go into this change? And yet I wanted the students to know that the Earth is always changing. It isn't stagnant. It isn't fixed. And that's a pretty hard thing to show a student, given the rate that obviously Earth doesn't change instantly from one year to the next. We know that the continental drifts and the plates are changing 4 centimeters a year, but that's not really visible to anybody. So in some cases, I really took an extreme approach so that they could see that there have been so large changes in our world, which also kind of connects that land originally was connected very differently. So for the world of a dinosaur, for example, that was very different. They had different places to roam, and then things started to pull apart as our world started to shift again, and the landforms and the tectonic plates shifted. We saw things happen. Well, that also affected life on Earth, but we can't get into all of that in this particular session. Forces of nature, they were talking about how does nature, what are some catastrophic events, or not necessarily catastrophic, but what are some things that happen that are natural events like tornadoes, like hurricanes, like volcanoes erupting where we don't have any control over that? How does that change? And what does that do to our location, our environment? Remember, environment was something that they came out of grade 1 and 2 with. Water cuts through rock. So I really still wanted to bring water into it because water is so much a part of our Earth. And yet we want to, how does that impact and what can it impact in time? So whether I talk about dinosaur age or I talk about canyons that we now can go and see that have taken thousands of years to get to where they are, that's the effect of water and the erosion and wind. Old versus new is about time. And remember in grade 3 math, they're also talking about time quite intently for the first time. So this would be a nice place to link the two together. Okay, so let's move on to forces of nature changes over time. I won't show all of these to you right now, but I will show the short one for you for sure. But again, remember I said I wanted them to understand, first of all, that time does have change. And when it talks about the world of Earth, we have had significant changes. Those continents that you're seeing right now on the picture Earth are obviously not where we started. So this video takes them through the last 200 million years. And it's a beautiful time-lapse photography that really shows them how those continents shifted, pulled apart, changed, and end up where we are right now. So when I look at this now, this says, so what do we know about changes on Earth right now? Right now might be, and this for some kids, this is still going to be way before their time, but 1985 to 2020, 37 years. What do we see that's changed? And we will play this one because it's a very short one.
There's a place in our universe, a marble spinning in a vacuum. It contains life. It contains us. It may look solid and enduring, but now we can see it differently. Across time, living and breathing. Across time, we can see that we, all of us, are changing this place faster than ever before. We can see the impact of the way we live. Of the choices we make. And see their consequences. There's a place in our universe. How we decide to treat it today will determine our future. What will you think? What will you do when you see our world changing before your own eyes?
It's a powerful little 37 seconds to be really talking about everything that actually is addressed in your current session. So there's so many questions in there that she says, there's so many little comments that she makes that are powerful, and they're good starting points for us to use for the students in the prompts. And again, I would always encourage you to think about, how do you want to assess this unit? Because that one little video can really direct them in the directions you want to go. Like, what is the impact of humans on Earth over time with change? What do they see even in their own environment, wherever they live? What does it look like for them? Have they seen changes even in their short lives that they've been on Earth? What have they seen that's changed that they've noticed? You know, in the part where she says, we live, the choices we make have consequences. That's part of it as well, right? You're going to talk about different kinds of different kinds of forms that we see on land, like glaciers. Well, those have some pretty powerful changes happening to them, and those are things that we can actually document over shorter periods of time in our lifetime. So again, the next pieces that you're going to see would be things like, what are places, and because they talk about volcanoes and whatever. Well, we can't unpack every one of those. They could model volcanoes and show you what it is, but that not in itself is going to get to the change concept of this organizing idea. It's part of cause of change. There's a belief that meteorites hitting the Earth also had some impact on dinosaurs dying. The fact that continents drifted and changed, that had an impact. So any one of these alone would not be enough, but could they do a research if they have a passion about one of them, and then connect it to the change on Earth, depending on how you unpack that. So again, I was looking for things and trying to find even things that adults might not be familiar with, that Rocky Mountains and the volcanoes in British Columbia. Like, do we have them? These are the pictures directly from there. It's a long video, but it's a great documentary for actually really opening your eyes about A, landforms, and B, the potential where our area in the Rocky Mountains is very, very thin, and that a volcano could erupt at any time. So lots of changes are possible, and we just want to talk about that. Also, what are some forces of nature that have happened over time? What are some things that have impacted the Earth from our perspective in Alberta? Because they were asking you to really focus on where the students live or in the province of Alberta. So I went and found some of those, like Frank Slide would be a very sort of well-known one. And again, not everybody knows about Turtle Mountain. Not everybody knows about Frank Slide. So the videos that I've embedded in here are also not only just information about change, but also to learn about the site. So that it's kind of a virtual field trip and allows them to learn a little bit about what happened in Alberta. Wherever possible too, I've also included the First Nations links into those, all right? First Nations peoples had very strong feelings about Turtle Mountain. They had said repeatedly for years and years and years, hundreds of years actually, that this was the mountain that moved. And so they always said there would never be an Indigenous camp at the bottom of Turtle Mountain. And no one in the town ever heard the story, is what they said, or would listen to the story. So how is it that they knew that there was something about this mountain that speaks or moved, that the potential of something going wrong was there? Recently, we had a flood in Calgary. So what is the power of rain? We had lots of rain. We had lots of tributaries that fed into smaller creeks that overrushed, ran into the rivers. We now had rivers that overflowed their banks and really affected a city in a way that never had been seen before. But not only did it affect the city, it changed the route of the Bow River. So I included this in here. When you click this on, it has all of the information, lots of slides and pictures to go with it. And again, that's not that long ago. The glaciers. We have lots of visitors that come to Alberta to see our glaciers. We have the Athabasca Glacier, which they can park at right on the highway. You can see that the coach is at the back here with people on the ice if they've never been there before. We have the Angel Glacier up at Edith Cavell. So there are all these different glaciers, but again, those glaciers have been changing. And the Athabasca one I chose that one because they have marked by years the recession of this glacier. When I was a young child, I remember this glacier because we are pretty much spend all my time I can in Jasper. That was very close to the highway. In fact, you could get out of the car and within a few steps, it was right there. And now you've got to go a good kilometer, if not further, to even come close to the bottom of it. It has changed and receded so much over time. So again, they've marked it, and we would talk to students about that, because when we talk about where did they get fresh water from, which was what they just did in the previous grade, we talk about glacial melt, we talk about rain. And again, this is going to affect. So it would be logical for a student to probably say, well, what happens when the glacier goes away? Yeah, what happens when the glacier goes away? What does that mean for us? So in keeping with water as well, I wanted them to understand that not only do we give them an example of, let's say, the flood in Calgary and how that water that rushed down the river at that time even changed the entire path of the river. What are some other long-term effects? Because remember, we're also going from dinosaur years, millions of years ago, to current time. So Maligne Canyon is another one, which is something, these are all free places, but these are just give you information. And I chose both summer because they also talk about what happens to weather changes in Alberta and what happens to water in those areas. So this is a rare canyon in which it's got a tremendous amount of forced water that comes through it, and over thousands of years has cut a deep canyon and smoothed out the walls. But here in wintertime, that very same canyon that I have to stand on the very sides or on a bridge and watch water rush down in huge forces of waterfalls freezes. And you can do what's called the canyon ice walk, or the canyon crawl, they call it, where all of these waterfalls are frozen in time. And now you get to walk from the canyon and look up instead of from the top down. So it gives students another perspective of how change happens. Not only just the canyon, but freezing water. And what does that look like? Many of us get to see a frozen waterfall. Looking at one of the tables that Ted provided you as an activity, how do humans, plant, animal activities cause change within the earth? Like we do farming. And if you're in a farming community, that would be an easy one for them to respond to then. Like, how do they change? What does their activity do as way of change? This is a landfill. How does this change what happens in that area? It changes the number of animals. It changes how life gets decomposed or not, because that's another issue, is what if it doesn't decompose? What about the pine beetle invasion that we had, right? How did that change the land? How did that change what we did? We went in and we cut a bunch of trees down. The very trees that we said we were so valuable, well, now they were dead. How did we get rid of this insect? So insects themselves can affect, an animal can affect what happens on land. So then old versus new, and I guess there was really no place for me to really put soil that was positively just throw it in there. But I really felt that if we're going to talk about 200 million years ago, we're going to talk about dinosaurs, then those terms that they come up with in our cusp of excavating, what does that mean? What are fossils? And why do fossils tell us about our past? How do we find them? How do we dig for them? Where do I find them? Under layers of different kinds of soils. So I provided you with a number of places in Alberta again. So Grand Cache would be one. They have one of the world's, they have the world's largest animal prints. And it's on a vertical wall, like it's actually amazing to see. And what have they done to support the saving of that so that it doesn't erode over time? But again, this is like a miniature field trip. So if you've never seen it, or the students have never had an opportunity to go there, or would never, or have never seen a mountain, there's another one. Now we could do that. Or going down to Dinosaur Provincial Park, which would be over here. And maybe we ask them to think about, well, here's 4 dinosaurs that have been found in Alberta. Do you want to research one of those? What kinds of vegetation did it live under? They don't always live in the same areas. What do you think happened to make its life change over time? Why did it disappear? Like, we have some opportunities then to make some of those connections. Fossils, the dino trails. That's another one that can be looked at from Grand Prairie. And this is an ongoing one. It's very current and it continues to be a dig. So again, if they've never heard of that, maybe they've been a hockey player and they played in Grand Prairie, but didn't even know that there was that happening up there. So just ways that I could try and find something that you can connect. In every one of these videos, it goes beyond just fossils or just excavating. It always brings it back to another part of your cusps in the other areas of your outcome as well. So trying to link as many pieces as we can together. So if the dinosaurs, and what I find about referencing a dinosaur is from different times in the past, millions of years ago, what about the soil of today? So what's good soil versus soil that has old bones in it? How is that different? So soil matters. It just gives you an idea of what is in soil and why is it important to us. What's good soil? What's bad soil? Because if you're a farmer, most kids that are on farms will tell you what good soil is and what bad soil isn't. So the other piece to the soil conversation that you have is what kinds of animals live in soil, and are there any animals that burrow in soil as a habitat that actually are good for us? There's lots that go in and they eat the bottoms of your vegetables in your garden, but not every animal is a bad, quote, bad animal for us. Some animals that have their habitats in soil are really good, such as an earthworm. So that's what I have at the bottom here. I just grabbed that one because that's one of the most common ones. An amazing animal. And this will give you not only sort of an overview of what an earthworm does and how it's beneficial, but there's an activity that goes with that as well. All right, let's move forward here. One of the other pieces that I was looking for was something that connected a little bit more of past and present. And one of your conversations about how water can weather things, how wind can weather things, was looking for some resources for you. And one of the slide decks that I came across, and this is one that we can use freely, it's called Soil and Weathering. So it covers good soil, bad soil. It covers how soil is over time. So I see this build up here. And then it also talks a little bit about how soil gets created in the different layers without getting deep. Now, there are some slides in here that I think go well beyond what we need, but because it's a PowerPoint and a slide deck, you can certainly edit out and just grab the ones that you want. So the link to the slide deck is right here. The source and reference is over here. So to kind of wrap this up, because it's so broad, students analyze changes in Earth's surface and explain how layers in the landscape hold stories of the past. So where is it that your students' interests lie? There's a lot of different places that they could grab into here. Depending on how you want to tie it together, they could do a research, let's say, of a dinosaur. Or maybe it's a current plant versus where did that plant come from over time? Like, how did it change? It's a sister or a brother or a relation to a plant that existed then. How did they change? And what might that be? So some students are into that kind of thing. Maybe natural disasters, right? Looking at some other things like the Frank slide, looking at some of the things like water that affected the rush of the water, that affected our flood, that affected that scenario in Calgary. Those aren't the only two that ever happened in Alberta. So there's lots of different places that they could go. If you have a particular area that you live in that perhaps supports one of those, maybe they could do that as a connection. Maybe they had a disaster of their own. Maybe there's been a huge change on their farm, and could they connect that as a transferable activity? It doesn't have to be a negative change either. So some resources that I just wanted to leave you with in addition. If they haven't done a lot of work on landforms and you're not too sure what they know, I did include some pieces about glaciers, because what is a glacier? First of all, if I've never seen one, then I might not even know what it is, other than somebody said it's a hunk of ice, which is not wrong, but it's a little bigger than that. So what are they? Why do they matter? What are some quick facts about them? So this is an info sheet. Soil as a habitat, just another one. This is a really short one, 2 minutes long. But this is a nice one because he also digs a hole and shows you the different layers that can show below just black earth on the top level of our soil, what's below that. People who do remote sensing, that's what they would do in order to say whether or not a building could go up in Edmonton, a big one, they would dig down a deep hole and look at the different layers for foundations. Habitats on Earth, soil habitating, exploring different habitats, that's what this one is about. And then this one here is, it's a resource, and I'm put the word general behind it, and I'll go there. This is just if you're looking for places for resources for science in general, it has one in here for soil. But I wanted to show you this because it offers you all the grades, and these grades are not Alberta grades per se, but they have very current materials in here for our new curriculum as well. So coding, if you haven't done anything like that, if you scroll down on this one, and you can go into any grade here, you're not stuck to just the one. When you go into this one here and you go close to the bottom, I think it is. Yep, here it is. What is in soil? You'll see that there's a downloadable resource. It has an activity, a lesson plan, there's handouts, there's a rubric, there's further resources. This is a really nice little site in the absence of having, let's say, a set resource that we might be using. Here's a great resource for you to go to. So I would bookmark this one, because it does offer you some bigger choices for sure. I've also included from the previous grade, from grade 2s, where they were talking about different landforms. So again, having a conversation about how the earth changed might be really hard if kids don't have a good idea of different landforms. Like, do they know a prairie from a plateau, from a valley to a mountain? Like, do they know those different? And in grade 2, they were asked to also look at UNESCO World Heritage Sites specific to Alberta. So provided them with videos of each of those sites and some in addition too, because some children might not know what a mountain is. So picked some that would be easy for them. If your family was traveling in summer, these are free ones that they can go to. So information, but then also to be able to have a conversation about the different landforms. So I'm going to try and get through this one without them all starting. So you have a number of slides of these that you can go through. And again, that might be something that's helpful for students to be able to see. Wood Buffalo National Park is also one that has a lot of historical background for Indigenous peoples. So that would be another one that you could connect to changes in land. And then same thing here, Maligne Canyon, you've seen a little bit about that with water, but here's some additional ones that they can look at. Spirit Island is another one that's changed a little bit over time, but that has a strong First Nations connection as well. So just trying to tie some of those pieces together for you so that it saves you a little bit of time in having to search for some of these pieces. All right, come on, let's go here. There we go. And so we've got the Badlands, you've got Drumheller, you've got Waterton Glacier. So if you're looking for something else for glaciers, again, all of this is just from grade 2, but also links very well into some of the things that you're doing. Okay, so I hope that that gives you a little bit of a starting point for some of the things that we're talking about. I'm going to just go out of this one here and stop sharing for a second. All right, and just let me pause our recording while we're at it.